In upstate New York, nestled in the Adirondack Mountains, is Big Moose Lake. The lake is in a beautiful, remote area. The perfect retreat for those looking for some peace and quiet. And luckily for visitors, they can stay right on its shores at the Wilderness Lodge of the same name, the Big Moose Inn. If you were to check into the inn today, you might say it feels frozen in time. They have DirecTV, Wi-Fi, and air conditioning, but much of it still feels like it did when it was built in 1902. Upstate New York was a very different place at the turn of the last century. Lumber mills and new factories cropped up in previously rural areas. One of the products made in these factories was part of a relatively new trend: ready-made fashion. People could now purchase clothing items from the mass market rather than paying a tailor or making their own. A young woman working in a garment factory might sew the same buttons or cut out the same shapes of fabric every day for hours on end. It was repetitive work and often dangerous, but it provided a path for young women to become financially independent. It is one of these factory girls that became Big Moose Lake's famous ghost. Ella felt a slight flutter as Cliff signed his name in the Big Moose Inn guest book. Soon it would say Mr. and Mrs. Cliff Graham. She was certain of it. She felt the softest kick in her belly, glad that the large ribbon she looped around her dress hid the small bump. She wanted to grab Cliff's hand and show him, but it wasn't appropriate. Not yet. Cliff had always been a romantic, her very own Prince Charming, rescuing his Ella from his uncle's factory floor. He whisked her away to storerooms and haylofts, to a land of sawdust and laughter. He told her their love was forbidden. It felt beautiful and dangerous, and she even got a slight thrill watching him pretend to court other women. Sure, he took them to high teas and played tennis with them, but he was hers. He'd promised. And she'd join them at the country club soon enough. Cliff's uncle liked him. He would give Cliff the factory one day, and when the prince was king, he could marry whoever he wanted. Ella had been frightened when she didn't bleed the first month. She was terrified the second month, and by the third, she knew she had to tell Cliff. But she hadn't known what to say. He told her she didn't need to say anything. He'd take care of everything. That was what a prince did. Some might say she should be worried he hadn't proposed yet, but Cliff liked to do things just so. He would want it to be perfect, and there was nothing more perfect than this beautiful remote lake and the quaint little inn on its shore. It was only him and her, alone in the world, together. So she felt confident in Cliff's intentions when he rented the rowboat to take them out onto Big Moose Lake. She wore her prettiest dress, a lacy white frock that floated slightly in the breeze. She wanted to look perfect for his proposal. He placed his suitcase in the boat. That was a little odd, but they also didn't have picnic baskets at the inn. He did love to surprise her, and his dark brows and full lips curled the way they always did before he revealed a secret. He helped her into the boat beside the suitcase, then set off into the early morning mist. He seemed distracted. She understood. She'd been nervous to tell him about the baby, too. Big announcements couldn't be rushed. She watched him row them further and further into the mist. He always looked so beautiful when he moved, like one of the lions at the zoo or a majestic bird of prey. She told him so, but he didn't blush the way he usually did. Ella worried that he didn't find her attractive anymore. She didn't want to be one of those wives who were mothers to their children and nothing more in their husband's eyes. She told him her worries, as she always did. He shook his head and told her she would always be the same beautiful young thing to him. Ella liked that answer very much. Cliff stopped and stowed the oars. Ella adjusted her hair as subtly as she could. Cliff opened up his suitcase. Ella braced herself. She knew he'd been to the city recently. She was secretly hoping for a blue box from a certain store with a woman's name. But really, any old ring would do. She loved him no matter what. Instead, he brought out his tennis racket. Ella tilted her head a little. This was the strangest proposal she'd ever heard of. She wondered if it was one of his jokes. Perhaps he meant to throw the racket into the lake to signify leaving all his simpering society friends behind. She asked him what was going on. He looked at her strangely, but didn't answer. Ella told him it was all right to be nervous. She didn't need a ring. He loved her, and that was all she needed, as long as it was just him and her. And before she could finish, Cliff brought the tennis racket down on her head. Ella fell to the side, making the boat rock precariously. When she reached up to touch the top of her head, her quivering hand returned, covered in blood. She asked Cliff what she'd done wrong. He didn't say a word. She realized he was waiting for her to topple into the water. But Ella refused to die that easily. She screamed, and the cries echoed along the surrounding mountains. But there was no answer. It was only him and her, alone in the world, together. She let out a cry of rage, sorrow, and pain. She tried to hit him, to claw him, anything to gain control of the boat. Ella was slight, but she was strong, too. She worked in a factory for 10 hours a day, while he lounged around in the front office. She gave him one more hard push, and the boat capsized. The impact separated them. Ella immediately began to sputter and sink. When Cliff had told her they were going to a lake, she warned him she couldn't swim. He could, however. He floated away from her, far enough to be out of reach, and close enough to watch her die. Water filled Ella's lungs, and murk clouded her vision. She reached for the mist-covered sky one more time. Then, she sank beneath the waves. On July 11, 1906, a wealthy young man named Chester Gillette headed out onto Big Moose Lake in a rented boat. His pregnant girlfriend, 20-year-old Grace Brown, joined him. Grace was a worker at his uncle's factory, and Gillette had kept his affair with her a secret from his wealthy friends. What happened next is a matter of debate. Gillette contended that he told Grace he would help her tell her father about the pregnancy. According to him, she was so upset at the prospect of a scandal that she jumped into the water. But when authorities found her body floating on the lake, it had signs of blunt force trauma. Gillette's tennis racket turned up missing when he was arrested, and he'd arranged to meet up with other women the day after the unfortunate accident. The police quickly detained Gillette. At his trial, his testimony was a study in contradictions. He denied having asked Grace to marry him, yet he also said he had planned to do so at some point. The district attorney asked Gillette if he loved Grace. He answered, "Yes, sir. I loved her on Big Moose Lake on July 11th, as well as I ever did." Though Grace was eventually laid to rest, her spirit has been spotted on the lake, searching for something. Perhaps it's her lost love, Gillette, and the future that was torn from her grasp. Or maybe she's keeping watch to make sure no harm comes to young women at Big Moose Lake again.